I finished rounds and it was about noon, and I walked by and he's sitting on his bed and he's wearing his Sunday best. He's got a little bow tie. He's got these patent leather black shoes. His mother is sitting in the corner and they're just quiet. There's nothing on. There's nothing happening. They're just waiting. And I said, why are you still here? You're ready to go. And his mother said, doctor, and by the way, medical students love it if you call them doctor. Doctor, he had something to tell you. And he hopped off the bed. He walked over to me and he said, doctor, thank you for saving my life.
Welcome to America's Healthiest City. I am your host, Will Melton, and today we are at the VCU Children's Hospital with Dr. Shari Barkin. Let's see, I want you to tell your title if you wouldn't mind, because
Sure.
I think you have a couple of different titles. Is that right?
Yes, I have two titles. I'm the chair of pediatrics and physician-in-chief of the Children's Hospital of Richmond. I'm also the mother of 3 children. I think that should be a title too.
I agree. So today we're going to interview Dr. Shari Barkin about children's health and community health, and some really interesting things about America's Healthiest City, which is our community partnership to make Richmond the healthiest community in America by 2033. So if you're new to the show, please check out americashealthiestcity.com and take a look at our ideas board. If you represent a nonprofit, a business, a government entity, or an academic institution, please take a look at becoming an ambassador to our program, and you can see about how all that works on our site. So without further ado, Dr. Barkin, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. You are just an incredible inspiration, and I know you're new to our community, so welcome. A little bit belated. I know you've been here for a little bit, but I'll give you an opportunity just to kind of talk about your pathway to Richmond, and we'll get into the hospital just a little bit.
Great. Well, thank you. This is a great honor. And I just love that the goal is the right goal. How do we take what we have, and we have so many strengths in Richmond, and really lift it up so we can be the healthiest city? Well, that's something worthy of getting up every morning for. My path to Richmond really started in a way that is nonlinear, which is how most things work, I find, in my own personal life. So I became a pediatrician because I met an incredible child that changed how I wanted to contribute to the world. I became a researcher because I wanted to be able to solve problems more than just one patient or one diagnosis at a time. And I became involved in academic medicine because I think this is a great opportunity to bring together how we teach the next generation of providers, how we advance discovery, and how we really improve the outcomes. It's not just about doing the same thing day by day. It's about growing and learning. People's health and disease states are dynamic. Our communities are dynamic. And an academic place is a great way to bring that constant learning and curiosity to bear to make a positive decision. And then why Richmond? Richmond, for me, I really was unfamiliar with Richmond, except I would drive through it as I was going to Duke. I went to Duke undergrad. And I really knew Richmond just as the big monument to cigarettes. That was my halfway point. That's why I knew it. So I came to know Richmond because I was at Vanderbilt, and I was at the Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt for 16 years as a division chief of general pediatrics. Fabulous community, incredible colleagues. I am so grateful, and I could have happily stayed there for the rest of my career. But Richmond called, and the reason why it called to me was because of this opportunity to stand up the Children's Hospital of Richmond. It's not that the Children's Hospital of Richmond is new. We've been around in some form or fashion for 100 years, but to stand it up in this state-of-the-art tower because of the generosity and commitment of the community is a moment in time. It's an inflection point to make a difference in a transformational way for children, families, and communities. And that was worth moving for.
Well, that's you've been all over the world teaching. I saw that you were in New Zealand. I know you were in California. I actually just came back from a wedding in Nashville. So what a wonderful place to be,
Yeah,
and a wonderful place for folks, who are staying there, but you came to Richmond. And so what a gift to us.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming here. I want to talk a little bit more about your background and kind of, you said that there was a child who you met that that inspired you. Actually, one of the questions that was prepared for me was what inspired you. So can you talk a little bit more about that? I know that in the research space, you're not often interacting with the patients quite as much, or maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not a doctor. Have some in my family, but tell us a little bit about that individual.
Sure, and I will tell you that that's something also great about academia. So I see patients and I teach, and that's something I do every week. It's bedside teaching. I do a lot of other types of teaching, and I also get to do research, and then I also have the privilege of leading a very talented team of people here in the Department of Pediatrics and through the Children's Hospital of Richmond. So that just means that every day is different for me, but it's important to stay connected to patients. That's such a part of the true north of what we're striving to achieve, is improving health and health care. So that child that really influenced me, I'm a classic generalist. I'm interested in everything. I thought when I chose medicine, I was really interested in neuroscience. And my family will tell you that I talk about the brain all the time. They're so tired of talking about the brain, common dinner conversation. And I had a chance to scrub into a lot of surgeries. My mentor was a neurosurgeon. I am in awe of what our surgeons can do and how much that field has changed. I love delivering babies, and I had an opportunity to deliver so many babies when I was both a medical student and a resident. And I thought, well, that sounds great too. Maternal child health, that sounds great. I loved working in geriatrics. I'm the only pediatrician who graduated from my medical school and as a declared pediatrician, but I won the geriatrics award because I really adore working with that population. Making a choice was hard for me because all of it is interesting. This actually relates to what it is to understand how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which is a theme that you'll hear as we continue to talk. So this particular child, for me, was a really special 5-year-old boy. I was at the Children's Hospital of Cincinnati. I went to medical school in Cincinnati. And I was a third-year medical student grappling with what I'd like to do and what type of medicine I'd like to do. And it was an overnight shift for me. And this sweet boy came in. He was delirious. We diagnosed him with something called urosepsis. So he was very sick. He had incredibly high fevers. And I was his first point of contact. So the world was a bit different then. We didn't have phlebotomists at night. The students actually, doesn't work this way anymore. The students actually started the IVs. So I started his IV, I drew his blood, I made his diagnosis, we started his treatment. My chief resident was in-house. That's also pretty rare. And he was doing his 2:00 rounds in the morning. And he popped in, anything going on, Shari? And I told him about this kid and I said, here's my differential. And he said, you're spot on. Let's move forward with that. This child became my patient, not just his condition, but the whole child and that whole family. And he didn't like me very much because it ended up that I was one of the only people who could start his IV. So I was associated with that sort of discomfort. And I really worked hard to get beyond that. He went from being so sick to entirely well in 5 days. And at the very end, I had put all my discharge orders in the night before, and if the labs came back with certain indices, he was good to go because I didn't want him to wait on me. I wanted him and his family to be able to leave. And I finished rounds, and it was about noon, and I walked by, and he's sitting on his bed, and he's wearing his Sunday best. He's got a little bow tie. He's got these patent leather black shoes. His mother is sitting in the corner, and they're just quiet. There's nothing on. There's nothing happening. They're just waiting. And I said, why are you still here? You're ready to go. And his mother said, doctor, and by the way, medical students love it if you call them doctor. Doctor, he had something to tell you. And he hopped off the bed. He walked over to me and he said, doctor, thank you for saving my life. And he hugged me. And I thought, why would anybody do anything but pediatrics? Because you have a chance to really change the trajectory of people's life. And I don't know if he remembers it the way that I do, and that doesn't matter. It matters to me because he's sort of a guiding true north of why I'm a pediatrician.
Wow. I imagine you probably cry a lot in your job. This is America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond, 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. Today we are interviewing Dr. Shari Barkin from the VCU Children's Hospital. Inspiring individual and wonderful storyteller as well. I know we have a lot of topic to discover, and there's not enough time, but I want to get right into how do we really think about community health as if we're going to take a journey for 10 years. And you and I have talked about this, and we're almost a year into our vision. We think about data, we think about people, we think about the environment, we think about behavior. I could talk about behavior change all day long, but you have experience in this. You worked for a long time in the Nashville community to try to see a similar vision. Can you tell us about that experience and just, maybe one lesson or two lessons that you learned from that?
Sure. You're specifically referring to something that was called Healthiest Tennessee. And this was an initiative that really came together recognizing that in Tennessee, the rates of obesity, smoking, hypertension had just skyrocketed. And it was affecting, and it is affecting everything. It affects, of course, people's health and sense of vitality. It affects the ability to work. It affects people's ability to concentrate in school and everything, the domino effect after that. And so this was a great initiative that was launched by our governor at that time that said, let's see what we can do to figure this out. And the parts of this that worked, we had an incredible array of stakeholders that came together that had never sat in the same room together. So often you can get educators and healthcare providers, you can get them in a room together. You can get certain businesses in a room with health insurance companies. You can bring government into each of those areas separately, but to actually create a really diverse group of stakeholders that includes the Chamber of Commerce and the businesses, as well as local and state government, as well as educators, as well as healthcare providers, insurance companies, the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation, and so many more. Mayors of each of the towns were involved. So many people were fully invested in, let's come together and figure this out. We care about this. So, and depending on who you are as a stakeholder, the reason why you care about it might be different, but this is still a shared sense of purpose. So that was a success, to get people in a room that don't typically come into a room together. Another success was that it was recognized that governments change, that local governments and state governments change. And so after the first 4 years of this program, recognizing that the time frame isn't 4 years, it's taken us decades, probably more than that, to arrive at this point in our society where we see this degree of chronic disease, and we won't be able to reverse it even with the smartest people and the best ideas in 4 years. The time frame has to be longer. And I'm really proud that Tennessee recognized that and said, they didn't say, oh, you haven't achieved these goals to reverse chronic disease in 4 years, which would not be a realistic goal. They said, all right, we've got a really good launching pad. Let's see how we're going to sustain it after that. So that was a second win, is that it was then turned into more of a nonprofit that could stand on its own, that didn't rely on whether this same governor was elected again. That was important. I think a third win that worked is the unexpected solutions. The unexpected solutions often are system solutions. And I'm really proud of the Department of Transportation in Tennessee. They're so remarkable. And by the way, I'm sure Richmond is doing great things. I'm just new here. So please, if you are in the Department of Transportation, call me. I would love to know what we're doing here in this city as a newcomer. But here's what they did that was brilliant. They looked through the lens of health before they made any transportation decisions. And that wasn't typical to me as a doctor. What is that? What does that look like from the Department of Transportation? So I'm going to give you an example. When they were planning new bus routes, they looked at including all communities because it hadn't been equally structured around the city. So they stepped back to look at the bigger picture. rather than making one decision, this one here, they said this decision in the context of all the other past decisions. And how could we, if we made this decision to improve transportation, how might it also advance health? We know that people that take public transportation tend to walk more, and they tend to be healthier, less likely to have hypertension, for example. But you have to make sure that your bus stops are in places that people can walk to. And there are sidewalks associated so that they're safe as they're getting there. That's just one example of how transportation becomes a natural ally to improving health for communities.
Well, I'm glad you said something about that because, it takes sometimes small ideas, but sometimes it's big systems that are going to be something that need to change. We ask our ambassadors, the one thing we ask our ambassadors is to, look at your strategic decisions through the lens of, will this make our community healthier? How will this make our community healthier? Because you can ask the yes or no question, but knowing on a measurable scale the impact that it's going to have can be a big driver and motivator for why we do what we do. I definitely will work to put you in touch with some people from the transportation. It's a regional group, and I think they just formed a new entity. So I'm not going to get it wrong on this show, but
Thank you. That'd be great.
I want to talk more about sort of the couple of things that you have been specifically researching over your past, which is childhood obesity and violence prevention. Those are two obviously important areas for you based on your work, but how are those things drivers or ailments that are something to focus on as we think about community health?
All of the questions that I ask and the things I'm interested in, it really comes through the lens of the patients that I've interacted with. I turn to what is it as a society we could do to advance violence prevention, because I had to be a first responder to a 2-year-old in Los Angeles who was the victim of a drive-by shooting. Just a bullet ricocheted off of the lamppost and into his head as his mother was holding him, and he was asleep in her arms. And I was in the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and as a second-year resident needed to respond to that. And I thought, there's something that we have to do about this. But I didn't think I have the answer. I didn't think medicine has the answer. I thought every part of our society has to care about this. So what's our part? What could we do? So that's what led me to asking questions about that. It also taught me a lot through that process of what the kind of research I do, which is called community engaged research. So I don't presume that I know even the right question to ask, but instead I go into communities. And in this particular case in Los Angeles, I spoke with preachers, teachers, community leaders, nurse practitioners, primary care doctors, a lot of parents living in a lot of communities, a lot of grandparents listening in those communities, and leaders of organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, who really were dealing with especially our high-risk populations. And they helped to guide what the question should be. And then we put that into place to test it, to see how we could improve outcomes. That's sort of the natural fit of how we can bring our skills together, because the community has the perspective about what are the right questions, as well as if we want to address this question in a way that's meaningful, not only effective, but potentially sustainable, how do we build this intervention before we even test it? Then what I can do with my training is I can then test it in a rigorous way to know what works and what doesn't.
Wow. So I know that something I wanted to touch on with this hospital and the work that you're going to be doing here, the work that you've done here. You guys see a lot of patients. I think 70,000 last year, is that right? How does that enable you to, you're collecting data on these patients and studying that, and how does the system work here to be able to think about community health? I know that's something that's very important to you.
I think I'm still learning about that. Just as if you're a patient here, we don't actually look at data in that way unless it's approved and we have IRB consent and we talk with our patients. There are large databases that have been collected across the country, and we look in those anonymized way at large databases to look for patterns. That helps us understand where do we focus, what new programs, what might we need to develop. So I just wanted to clarify that, because some of the research projects that I'm talking about that I usually lead are what's called randomized controlled trials. They're intervention trials to change outcomes. So for pediatric obesity, I work with parents and children together, and then we test an intervention to see how we can improve nutrition, physical activity, sleep, and how we manage stress to see if we can improve the health of both the child and the parent. And those types of studies are very different, so that they might be patients of ours, or they might be in our community, and all are welcome to participate if they choose to. So I just wanted to clarify, there are different ways of looking at data, and we're very careful about making sure that we give people opportunities to participate if they'd like to, but it's not something we automatically do.
Gotcha. Well, we'll talk a little bit about how that influences how you reach out to the community, but this is America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. We're interviewing Dr. Shari Barkin from the Children's Hospital at VCU and Children's Hospital of Richmond at VCU. I want to get that right.
Thank you.
I know it matters.
It does.
And so talking about, studies and talking about, the community of Richmond, I know that you're new, but your research has obviously informed a lot of outcomes that are positive for individuals, but also the whole, as you say. What are some maybe ideas that we can think about as we're encouraging people to inject their own ideas into our online ideas board? What are some things that we can be thinking about today as we think, okay, we've got 9 more years to achieve this, and I know that we're going to keep going after that because we're going to always be a community. But maybe just 1 or 2 ideas that you might inject.
Well, I would say at first I'm going to start with some guiding principles, and then a couple of ideas, and recognizing that this is the strength of our community, is to bring our collective good ideas together and then determine what is most potentially sustainable and successful. So some guiding principles that I think are important. A community engaged approach where you're really listening to what are we already doing well, and then how can we create more collective impact. So sometimes it's easier, not harder than we imagine. So listening, and I start everything that I do with listening tours to try to get a sense of what's going on, and then how the pieces might be able to fit together so we can amplify our outcomes. That's a guiding principle. Another guiding principle is applying quality improvement to what we do. This is a methodology that recognizes that the world isn't static, it's dynamic. So even if we found the perfect thing to do today, it might not work in a year or 2 from now. And creating systems that allow us to have clear, compelling dashboards to say, yes, we are hitting our goal, or we're moving towards our goal. And then recognizing we can't be static, but we need to be dynamic. That's really important as well. So, and then the dynamism is that new community organizations are popping up and new issues are occurring. So how do we become a learning environment, a learning system? So those are some of the guiding principles. And of course, equity and how we achieve lifting up the whole of the community, not just some communities. So some examples about that and how to look at what could possibly work. I love my call out to the Department of Transportation, because we could do the same thing for our Department of Transportation, our Department of Education, any of the specialties that are looking at how we're building businesses, which I know Governor Youngkin really has prioritized. If we look at each one of these initiatives and we push ourselves to say, what would it look like to make a decision through the lens of health? I think that could take us farther, faster, in a way that's aligned with each other. So it can't be an extra thing. That's not sustainable, even if it's a brilliant idea. The second example I'd like to sort of throw out is there are some good best practices that other communities have tried. Not to say that it works necessarily in every community. Every community is different. And by the way, we say community like it's one thing. We have multiple communities, and understanding the personality of all of those communities and how we come together is really important, and bringing a lot of humility to the table. That's another guiding principle. So there is something called the All Children Thrive initiative. And again, I'm going to speak through the lens of pediatrics. There might be many things like this for adults as well. But through the lens of pediatrics, if we improve things for children, we often can improve them for the family. And then you get the 2-generation approach, and that allows for true amplification of impact. So I think that this is a good model for us to look at. The All Children Thrive Network, they use quality improvement as their methodology. Their goal is simple: create the conditions in a community where all children will thrive. Then you have to define, how do you measure that? What does thriving look like? I can tell you from their initiatives, and this is something that started in Cincinnati, but it exists in many other cities, that what they've been able to do is increase children reading at a 3rd grade level by 3rd grade from 40 to 70%. That's a hard metric. Mm-hmm. We know that that's a super metric, because if children are reading and on point by 3rd grade, they do better in school. They're more likely to graduate. They're more likely to get a job. They're more likely to own a home. So we know that if you look at super metrics like that and do that really well, what you're doing is setting up this trajectory towards really improving health collectively.
So it sounds like, being ready for change, all the time is part of this. Change is hard for people. You've seen that in patients, I'm sure. Right. What ideas do you have around motivating people to accept change or consider it as an option that's better than what we have today?
Change is hard for everybody, including us, right? I think that you get comfortable doing what you're doing and it's served you in some way, or you're familiar with it and it is difficult to do. I think it's really coming together in a shared sense of purpose. And it starts by really understanding, as you're bringing these diverse stakeholders together. And in Richmond, I've had the pleasure of meeting some amazing community organizations, organizations working on housing, homelessness, education, health, food access, food security. Our medical legal partnerships here are fantastic. These are just a tiny bit of many really good things that are happening in this community. But understanding people's sense of purpose and starting there, because usually when you go around the table and you understand people's motivation for doing what they're doing, that's when you can find that shared sense of purpose. And then it's easier to say, all right, we actually agree on this, achieving this. And in this case, I hope it's the healthiest city in America, which would be incredible. And I do believe that Richmond has the ability to achieve something like that because of the way our community exists and the size of our community and where we are in the moment of time for Richmond's history. We've got a great opportunity to make true change and become healthier, if not the healthiest.
Well, that's why we're doing this, and we're going to keep going. We're going to keep talking to people because I think listening is a big part of it. We want to listen to people out in the audience as well, or in anywhere in the community. We want you to inject your ideas into this process. AmericasHealthiestCity.com is the place to do that. While we have just a couple of minutes left, I wanted to know if there's somebody in this community that you think that we should interview, or maybe if you're still new and want to meet somebody in the community in addition to the Department of Transportation. I'll give you an opportunity to share there.
Oh, okay, great. So, and I've only been here a year, so the parts of the community that I've met that I think are really special that I don't see in a lot of other communities. There's a wonderful group called Armstrong Renaissance, and the goal there is to create respectful, dignified housing and change how we look at public housing. If you don't actually own a home and know how to sustain that, it's difficult to get work. And if it's difficult to get work, it's hard to maintain food for your family, education for your family. It's one of those core upstream measures. And this group is doing some remarkable things. I think the Underground Kitchen Community First is really knocking it out of the park and doing a lot of creative things for how to bring communities together, but not only to provide healthy food, but to build a circular economy, to train a workforce and learn about how we prepare healthy food while you're giving people the opportunity to earn a livelihood. That sort of circular economy is just a brilliant idea, as well as changing our relationship with the types of foods that are presented in preschools and in elementary schools to change palates and change what kids are interested in eating so that we can hopefully break the cycle of chronic disease. Those are two examples. There are many more. There are so many fantastic change agents in this community that know and love this community for decades. And I really want to better know who all those people are and listen deeply to them.
Well, you gave me a couple of strong starting points. We've actually had Michael Sparks and Kate Houck on the show.
Oh, great.
And so it sounds like it's about time to get them back, because I know that they're always cooking up new stuff, no pun intended.
Pun intended.
Pun intended. So I hate it that we've run out of time here, so I'm going to have to come back to this hospital to do this interview again. But thank you so much for sitting with me and for sharing your insights. It's going to be very important, and I think it's going to shape a lot of what we do.
Thank you for this opportunity. The Children's Hospital of Richmond, it's about children and children's health care, and it's really about how we maximize children's health. So thank you for this opportunity to partner.
Great. Well, this was America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. Catch us Thursdays at 6 a.m. or streaming on YouTube. We'll catch you next week.